Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Purpose Tune podcast. The goal of my show is to create valuable content to broaden your knowledge, inspire you to act, and get you in the right mindset so you can apply it in your own life to drive impact, generate meaning, and achieve your purpose. Now, today's guest is Purdeep Sangha. He is the world's leader in complete executive consulting. He is widely known as the strategist for businessmen and teaches men how to become the complete man, which is a man who achieves ultimate performance, fulfillment, and victory in every area of his life. Purdeep's personal mission is to help men grow their businesses massively, increase their personal fulfillment in life, and improve their relationships with their kids and wife. So Purdeep, thank you so much for joining me on this lovely day. Let's check in. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's when I first came across your bio, I was like, oh, I need to get him on my show because he is my ideal guest, someone that can speak well in the areas of fulfillment, purpose, and even performance in the performance space. And so let's dig in a bit more into your background. How did you get started in your work?
Wow, that's kind of a long story. Where do I start? Well, let me give you the beginning notes, I guess. I grew up in a immigrant family. My parents immigrated from India, and they didn't have any formal education, so all they knew how to do was really work hard. And when they came to Canada, they got a job on an orchard, and because it was physical manual labor, and they knew how to work hard. And so I pretty much grew up on an orchard. That was as long as I could remember. I grew up on an orchard until my parents actually bought their own. And we still have that orchard in the family right now. But long story short, I grew up in a very hardworking family. At the age of 16, I started to manage employees. At the age of 17, I became a personal trainer. At 17 as well, or throughout high school and university, I was always an academic tutor for my peers and others. Because my parents told me that I should be working hard, getting an education, because they didn't want me to struggle like they struggled.
Mm.
So they pushed me in that direction. And so also one of the big things that kind of led me to what I'm doing today is my dad was an awesome dad, but he was also challenged with alcoholism. And that's something he struggled with since he was like 15 years old.
Mm.
And he could never shake that. And when he would, and he was a big guy, he was a physically big guy. And sometimes when he would drink past his limits, he just became a totally different person, which was a little bit scary for me as a kid when I was like 8 or 9 years old. So I started to try to figure out why he would drink so much. So at that age, I would say I started to watch people's behavior, why they do certain things, why they are motivated to not do other things, which kind of just led me to where I am today. I spent 14 years in the corporate world and I excelled very well. I was a top executive in the industry. I was considered one of the go-getters until I actually walked into work and I quit. But I attribute that to my thirst for knowledge, because I've always been, since I was a kid, into neuroscience, performance psychology, trying to figure out how to be the best version of myself.
Mm.
And that's something that led me to obviously help other people. That's my big passion in life. So when I left the corporate world and I started my own firm, one of the big things that I thought I would start off with was helping people grow their businesses, but it soon became a combination of helping them grow their businesses plus helping them perform better as people, human beings, husbands, fathers. And it was very much about them just as much as it was about their business, because I could give them a strategy or tactic. That's actually the easiest thing to do for business growth. But if the person is not executing effectively, if they're not making the decisions in the right direction, if they're not constant, for example, and they're second guessing themselves, well, they're not going to execute as effectively. So there's a combination approach to helping people. It's not just giving them here, this is what you need to do. This is something I learned when I was a personal trainer at 17, because I could give them a plan, how to eat properly, how to exercise. But most of the people wouldn't do that. It's because there was something internally in them that they needed to change or modify or remove or add into their personality or their identity that actually had to get them to shift to where they wanted to be. So a long story short, I've combined the worlds of business plus performance, plus you could say human potential, plus being a man and being successful in business as a husband, as a father, all in one, to help businessmen in particular.
Mm. So that's fascinating. So we're in an era where there's emphasis on developing the next generation of women to become uh, leaders of their business or in the corporate world. And so, do you get any negative feedback from folks when you say you're more focused on men? And do they say, "Well, what about women?" Because there's a great need for leadership in that space, particularly when it comes to women in leadership. What's your
Mhm.
what's your response to that?
Yeah, definitely. I get that once in a while, not so much anymore, because the people that know my brand know my brand. And so when we first created it, yes, we had a lot of questions. And when people are exposed to it now, or me, and they're wondering, okay, what is this? Is this chauvinistic? Is it sexist? And then they identify or they understand what we truly do, then they're all on board. Like some of our biggest advocates are actually women. Our podcast, for example, called Male Entrepreneur, everything that we talk about in my book, we have just as many women commenting and giving feedback as men. So at the beginning, yes, and it's a really interesting time because I knew I was onto something when I had the first start of the Male Entrepreneur podcast, because I had shirts made, and the
Mm.
shirts had my logo, and then I had the Male Entrepreneur, and I had a bunch of guys and guy buddies that said, that's an awesome shirt, I want one. I'm just not sure if I would actually wear it because I don't want people to judge me a certain way. I don't want my female clients to look at me. And when I heard that, I knew I was onto something, because if men are afraid to express themselves as men, then there's a bigger challenge there. And so that's kind of what led me, and kind of kept pushing me to do what I'm doing now, because there's a lot of women now that say, thank God, it's refreshing to actually see this, because there are a ton of female entrepreneurial groups. There are a ton of female groups in general. Very few. There are some for men, but they're not as, I would say, broad, and they don't take in the holistic approach.
Mm.
So they're very narrowly focused, even though they might say that they aren't. But a lot of it is very narrow focused in terms of the thinking and things that they identify, because we use proven strategy and tactics, but also proven science, right? A lot of our stuff is backed up by science through biological sciences, neuroscience, because men and women are fundamentally different. We have different bodies. We work off of different hormones. So it's something that's important. And when people understand that, they're like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So can we revisit the concept of the holistic approach? What is that?
Sure. Yeah. So if we take a look at the holistic approach, there's three elements that we really focus on within our, you can say, advising for men. One is performance, which is really being able to enhance your ability to perform in business, but also in life in general. So improving your own personal performance, thinking better, making better decisions, having more energy, being more creative, all of these different aspects. Being able to think broader, for example. Then there's achievement, which is about goal setting and also achieving your goals. It's about the strategy to get there, right? That's a second element, because everybody wants to achieve their goals. There's no point in being a high performer if you're not going to achieve anything, right? That's just, it's
Right.
like being, I'm an Olympic athlete, but I've never won a gold medal or a medal at all. And then there's a third element, which a lot of people miss out on, which is the fulfillment aspect. And that's really what closes a loop. Those are the three things, because a lot of guys want to perform and achieve, but they miss out on the fulfillment aspect.
Mm.
And lo and behold, when you actually are fulfilled, you actually perform better and you actually achieve more. So when you actually add that element into it, it actually closes the loop and actually makes you what I call the complete man. That's the whole premise that we work on. So the holistic approach is not just performing in business, it's performing better as a person, as a man, as a husband, as a father, and as a human being. Like there's just so many different aspects to being a man, that a lot of things are missed just in typical society today. And when you are whole, when you are taking a look at the big picture and you become complete from within, which is the most important thing, regardless of what you have in your external world or not, then you live a more happier, fulfilling, and a higher performing life.
Mm. What's your definition of fulfillment?
Fulfillment for me is being able to sit here today and feel good about the life that I have and the person that I am, regardless of what is happening. So that for me is fulfillment. And for some people, it's different. I live a very passionate life. I live a very, you can say, a growth-driven life, and that's what I'm about. But I have a lot of peace and I have a lot of content. Those are the emotions that I want to feel on a regular basis. And so fulfillment for someone else may be different. Some people are more fulfilled with excitement, for example. There's people that love to do, you can say, dangerous sports, whether it's skydiving or rock climbing, whatever that is. That's not my forte. That's not what brings me fulfillment. So what brings me fulfillment is different than what brings some other gentleman fulfillment. And I think that's important. When it comes to fulfillment, my definition of fulfillment, essentially at ground level, is to be able to live the emotions that I want to feel on a regular basis, whatever those emotions are. And I think each person needs to identify what that is for them.
So speaking of emotions, I'm sure you've probably heard of Brene Brown's The Power of Vulnerability. What's your take on vulnerability and men?
Well, I think vulnerability is important because allowing yourself to be vulnerable, first of all, allows you to be able to grow. If you're just putting up a wall all the time or ignoring, you're not able to identify the emotions that are impacting you and the things that are actually happening in your life to actually address them and grow and learn from them. That's one of the most important things. It's also good to be vulnerable for the other people around you, because vulnerability is an aspect to building trust in relationships.
Mm.
But excuse me, there's this concept that men need to be vulnerable all the time or be over vulnerable, and that's not true, because that is the opposite of masculine energy, for example. And in any balanced relationship between the feminine energy or masculine energy, or you can say typically a man and a woman in a heterosexual relationship, the woman is looking for someone that is solid. So if you speak to my wife, for example, she appreciates that I'm vulnerable and I can share my emotions with her and feelings with her.
Mm.
But she also appreciates that I'm very strong. She knows that I'm going to be there, and I don't worry very much. I have a very high stress tolerance, meaning I don't get stressed out very often.
Mm.
And she knows that when I need to take care of business, I take care of business. So there's a balance. Just like anything in life, you have to be able to be vulnerable in the right situations, because if you are a vulnerable man and consistently vulnerable, that can be a turnoff for your wife as well, because she's looking for someone that's strong.
Right, exactly. So on that note, I'm one of 12 kids and I've got 5 brothers, and I've seen how how the marriage have played out. And there have been moments where I've caught them where my brother would show vulnerability and and his wife would be unfamiliar with that feeling, that emotion. And so in a sense, it hindered his connection with her. And based on that, he just chooses not to show that side of it. So how do you get women on board to connect with men when they do show vulnerability? And when is a good time to show that emotion?
Well, so let me answer the second one. When is a good time to show that emotion? Is when you're trying to build connection. I think that's one thing. So if you have kids, for example, you want to be able to connect with them emotionally. So emotions are there for us as human beings to connect with other people, including ourselves. So being emotional, even let's just say no one's around, being emotional or having or feeling your emotions as a man by yourself is important, because therefore you know how you're feeling, you know how to change that and convert that. Emotions are basically two fundamental things. They're information and they're energy sources. So you have to be able to utilize it. So if it's an emotion that's disempowering you, you can actually convert that because it's an energy source. So you can turn fear into power if you want, right? You can also turn anger into power. You can also turn happiness or passion into anger. It's very easy to convert emotions. But you have to remember that emotions are either empowering and disempowering. If you become the master of your emotions, you become the master of your life, because most people are driven by their emotions. So we are emotional creatures. We think our emotion is baked into us when we make decisions. That they're not separate from a neuroscience perspective. That theory was long gone when people talked about theory or logic versus emotions. It's a continuous network that feeds off each other. So our thinking, although we try to say, oh, I'm just being logical, there's an underlying emotion in there as well. in a situation that you were describing, when there's a woman, for example, that might not be fully aware or conscious of how to deal with vulnerability, it's because a lot of women have been trained not to be vulnerable these days. A lot of women have been trained through the feminist movement that started in the 60s, and a lot of it for good reason, because women were being oppressed, and equal rights, all of that stuff needed to happen. But there's also, just like any shift, there's also consequences, and women have been taught now to be independent. For example, you don't need a man, right? Even to the point where they're saying being a housewife is not fulfilling. Well, for a lot of women, it is. You don't necessarily need a career if that's not something you want to do. But a lot of women are feeling pressured to have that. So when it comes to vulnerability specifically, well, that's a tough one, because for a man, we have to go to the reasons why people feel certain things. And so for men, I know a lot of times it's not necessarily that they want to be vulnerable to their woman. They need energy. They need a replenishing of energy. So they will go to a woman, for example, trying to get that energy feedback back. Because for us as masculine men, for example, or in our masculine energy, when we're driven, when we're working our butts off, when we're highly stressed, for example, the thing that recharges us is feminine energy. That's what we need. And so that vulnerability sometimes is because we're just telling our wives, or we want our wives to just give us energy in some way, shape, or form. Maybe that's just a hug. Maybe it's a kiss. Maybe it's holding hands. Because there's this big misinformation that men don't like to be intimate. Yes, they do, because it's a form of energy for us. Sex, for example, right? Intimacy, all of those things are what feed men of the masculine energy. So that vulnerability, I think it has to be taken into context in terms of what it is. Is your brother going to her looking for support? Maybe he just needs her to say, hey, look, I got your back, right? Whatever you need to do, you go do it. Or, you know what, maybe your brother's had a tough day and he just wants someone to give him a hug. Like, that's not bad. And that doesn't make you weak. If you're consistently in that behavior, right? And if you're consistently showing that, that's a different story. But if you can open up and be vulnerable at those times, it's a very you can say, interesting moment for people to actually connect with each other. So I don't know if I could comment directly on your brother's situation, because I don't know the context behind it. Because what we have to do is dig a little bit deeper and see what is your brother needing at that particular time from his wife.
Yeah, I think for him, it was more of emotional support. And rarely does he show that side of himself. And I haven't really been witnessing it. And so it was just that particular day and time that I happened to be there and noticed it. And it was actually, for me, refreshing to see that, because to me, perceiving that situation, it was like, oh, wow, he's also human. Of course he's my brother and I see him as a human being, but like I fully saw him as what he was at that moment. And that was powerful. That was, I thought, inspiring to see. And which goes to show that when it comes to emotions and feelings, and it can be complex, and how we perceive people, and how emotions are tied to that person, could really change your perception rather quickly. And so I appreciate your insight on the power of vulnerability, especially when it plays among men. My next question here is, how do you define purpose?
Well, a purpose is that's a really interesting one. So purpose for human beings is there's a function for something, right? And purpose, if we take a look at what most people attribute purpose to, is, okay, what am I doing here? What's my meaning, or what's the reason for me to be on this earth? Like, what's the point, is what I hear a lot that comes up. And having a purpose is important. And so for me, purpose is the reason why you're put on this earth. And fundamentally, I think there's two things. One is, from my personal belief, that we're put on this earth, because to enjoy life. And because there wouldn't be any other reason to, right? And we have the ability to enjoy life. We have the ability to live it to the fullest. So why not do that? There's this concept out there that desire is bad. Desire is not bad. Overindulgence and desire, where it takes you off your balance and selfish and self-absorbed, that is bad. But desire is good, because we all have desires. And to try to shun desires, just like if you try to shun your masculine energy, will keep popping up in some other way, just like a volcano will erupt. If it doesn't erupt in one mountain, it's going to erupt. That lava is going to come out somewhere. So you can use it to your benefit, or your you can say to propel yourself in life rather than hold yourself back. So the second thing to purpose is, I think every human being has a unique purpose on this planet, and that is unique to them as an individual. So that could be, you have a unique purpose through your podcast, through your relationships, through your siblings. You have already impacted people. You've already had some kind of influence in someone else that's going to have a ripple effect throughout time, whatever that is. So each person has a unique purpose and a meaning for this. And I think it would be impossible. And I never tell a man that I'm working with what his purpose should be. Never, because he has to find that himself. He has to identify that himself. And because he's going to have to live with it. He's the one that has to put the effort into it when times aren't going tough, or when times are tough. And here's the interesting thing. We are dynamic beings, meaning that our purpose today isn't necessarily what our purpose is going to be a year from now, or 2 years, maybe even 10 years. If we look back at what we were like as teenagers, or even our 20s, my purpose was completely different than what it is now. And I'm sure my purpose is going to be different another 10 years out. So everything in life is changing. It's dynamic. And that means that our purpose will be dynamic as well. We can have an overarching vision or purpose, but be prepared for changes in life.
So speaking of changes, what are some of the life skills that you incorporate into your own life when it comes to changes in your life, either through, I don't know, transition from corporate to your entrepreneurship, corporate America to entrepreneurship, or getting married, or having kids? Like, what are some of these skills that you could share with us that have helped you navigate through life changes?
Yeah, really great question. And we have a project that we're working on. 24 people are working on a project that are taking in these levels of skills. And actually, we're building guidelines and workbooks for our clients. So here's the skills that I've identified over the last, you can say, 2 decades. I've really brought this in and made it into a system, because I think knowledge is great, but knowledge isn't that useful as a system, because when you can transfer that knowledge into something that's workable and repeatable, people can actually take that and actually run with it. So here's what I've identified over my time when it comes to the skills. First of all is motivation. You have to be able to, that's the starting point. You have to be able to know what motivates you and how to sustain motivation. If you can't get that going, then the engine's not going to start and you're not going to move, regardless of how talented you are. The second thing is skill advancement, because you could be super motivated to do something, but you have to have a certain level of skill to get there. And so you have to identify the gap, and then you have to identify the plan to say, okay, I'm going to move myself as a person and up my skills, whatever that is. Maybe it's leadership, maybe it's communication, maybe it's a relationship skill, whatever that is, to be able to achieve that goal that I want to attain. The third thing is execution. You have to be able to be good at execution. And that includes planning, that includes decision-making, right? Those are 2 fundamental things that are important, as well as there's other things in performance that are in there as well. But let's just say you have to be good at executing. And that also includes your habits, your daily habits, for example. And then the fourth element is really around innovation. So the skill of innovation is important. And that takes into 2 particular points. One is the ability to be creative, and the second is the ability to solve problems. So if you're good at those 2 skills, that's going to help you as well. And then the fifth element is sustainability. And sustainability is important because a lot of people miss out on that. They'll go. They'll have super motivation. They'll drive their skills. They'll execute at the beginning, and then just things fizzle out. So you have to be able to sustain things. And that comes to measuring, for example. That comes to having fortitude, right? Having the right amount of energy. So these are the things, the 5 things I always tell people is motivation, skill advancement, execution, innovation, and sustainability. If you want to be successful in life, focus on those 5 elements.
Hmm. So in the space of human behavior in change management, obviously can be difficult. I've worked with organizations to get leaders to not only change their behaviors and help model that change so that employees can follow them, but also helping employees change their behaviors so that their these behaviors are aligned with the values of the organization and ultimately the strategy and mission. And so what I've found is that the 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 arena of human behavior and changing that can be difficult. So how do
Mhm.
you get people, like you have like the 5 steps to like be a ultimate man, and you can give that information to your client, but at the end of the day, it's up to that person to make that change. How do you get them to make that change and follow your 5 steps?
Yeah. So fundamentally, it is up to that person. And that is the biggest thing. So that person has to understand that first of all. But when it comes to things like motivation, for example, if you're a leader and you're trying to influence someone, you have to understand that having a clear goal, that's one of the first elements of motivation. People
Mhm.
have to be on the same page. So the goal for change management, for example, is does that individual's goals match with the overall project goals or the change goals overall? That's a fundamental aspect. Then you also have to take a look at what's reward for them, right? Why would they even be interested in this? What is their internal basically drive system based on? So all of these things play into the motivational aspect of a human being, and understanding each individual is important because each individual has and is driven by something different.
Mm.
So we try in change management, there's an approach of trying to have a blanket system, and that doesn't necessarily work. You can have broad communications, but you have to speak to each person individually and show them what it means to them, what benefit it is to them to be able to change. So all these 5 steps that I'm talking about are applicable to people and are applicable to leaders as well. Because if you take a look at the second thing of skill advancement, well, that's another reason why people don't change in organizations is because they may want to, but they're afraid because they're like, I may not have the skill. So
Mm.
you have to identify and help them identify and say, hey, look, this is where we are today. This is where we want to be. This is where your skills are today. This is where the skills that we need to get you to have by tomorrow. Here's a gap, and here's a training plan or the support plan that we have for you to get there. So
Mm.
that's going to close off the gap when it comes to skill advancement. Then if we take a look at execution, it comes down to planning is one of the first elements. So you have to help them and give them a plan,
Mm.
right? And sit down with them and say, okay, what is the plan for us to go through this? Right.
Mm.
And I'm here to help you. I'm here to support you. But here's the plan. Over the next 6 months, this is what we're going to do together. And we have a plan laid out. We have some milestones laid out. And therefore, we know who's accountable for what. Then there's a decision making aspect to say, okay, because there's always conflicting priorities in organizations, right? And the decision for people when it comes to change management is, do I continue to do the thing that I used to do all the time based on my previous habits and my previous skills, or do I do something different? And you have to be able to corral them into doing something different in the direction that you want them to go. So therefore, you make their decisions easier by whether it's providing the training, the skills, the processes, whatever it is, and make it tougher for them to behave in the previous pattern, right? And one of the big things that impacts that is environment. So you might have to change the environment in some way, shape, or form. So that's on the execution side. Then we have innovation. And so that's, again, that's creativity and problem solving. So you have to be able to, again, when people come up against a challenge, which they will in change management, they absolutely will. They're doing something different. There's always going to be a roadblock. You
Mm.
have to be able to show them how to overcome their problems, or at least be there to support them through them. So
Right.
if they come up against a roadblock, you don't want them to revert back to their previous behavior. You want them to say, okay, I'm going to be creative enough to overcome this, or I'm going to ask for help so that we can do this together. And then again, it comes back to sustainability, right? How does this person have enough energy? Are they seeing the motivation? Do they have the rewards to keep going? down this path. Because if you're trying to get someone to change, but they're not, there's no benefit to them, right? They're not seeing any rewards, they're not getting recognized in any way, and it's costing them a lot of energy to keep going down this new path, and they're not replenishing their energy by some way, shape, or form, then they're going to revert back to their old behavior. So these are all elements. It's an ecosystem that everybody, and so as an advisor, I have to be aware of these things, and I make my clients aware of these things. But even because someone is aware doesn't mean that they're going to be able to get through it. And so when it comes to change, there's two big things that, I should say three, that really have popped up for me. One is support, being there to support the people that you're working with or helping through change. The second is accountability, right? Everybody has to be accountable, including the person that is trying to change. The third element is self-integrity. And this is where is probably the toughest for a lot of people, because a lot of people operate with self-integrity and a lot of people don't, or they operate with self-integrity in certain aspects of their life, but not all aspects. So they may be, for example, maybe super disciplined at work and be able to get their tasks done and be on time and all of that kind of stuff. But they may go home and not be able to stick to their diet. Right? So therefore they feel like they don't have integrity at home. So all of these things have an impact on people, but self-integrity. So when I'm looking for someone to work with, or someone is coming to me and saying, hey, look, I need your help, or I want you to help me, those are two things that I look for most importantly. Does this person have self-integrity? Meaning that, are they going to do what they're going to say? And are they going to hold themselves accountable? Because if they're not, that's a very tough road to go down to try to help someone to change, because then you become a glorified babysitter.
Yeah. And then I also would love to add an additional point to that, is the modeling behavior too, right? So sometimes people need to see the type of behavior that ultimately needs to be changed in order to change themselves. And so, for example, from an organizational standpoint, when I work with business leaders and they come to me and say, look, I'm struggling to get my employees to change their behavior so that we can achieve an objective, or a goal. And I would follow up with the next question, well, are you role modeling the type of behavior you want in your employees? And they often step back and reflect and say, that's a good question. I'm not sure if I am. And so as human beings, we are visual learners, at least, the people that I work with. And so it's always nice and refreshing to see that when a leader is speaking about this change, that they're also modeling it, because it means there's alignment, and therefore creates trust. And employees will trust their leaders because they speak what they say, they do what they say. And so I love that. Great insight. Thank you for sharing. What inspires you to do the work you're doing today?
Oh, wow. What inspires me is, well, a couple of things. First of all, is just living out the memory. I was fortunate enough to have great mentors in my life. And so I had a great grandfather that taught me a lot. He taught me a lot about spirituality. He taught me a lot about principles, values. He was just a phenomenal man, and taught me about, you can say, just different aspects of being human, because he was a very spiritual person. And so in memory of him, I continue to do what I do, because he was such an influential person. And in memory of my father, because again, he taught me everything. He's a big reason why I'm here doing what I'm doing, because I saw the challenges that he faced, and that enabled me. So for years, I've seen these challenges for decades, 30 plus years, that I've been able to put under my belt here when it comes to human behavior, and specifically for men. So if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. But what inspires me the most is being able to have an impact, because I know that every time I have a conversation with a man, that I can see something turns on in them, and whether it's a light bulb or whatever it is, and they start changing their patterns or their behaviors, or they're having more success, they're making more money, and they're be better in their relationship. It's not only impacting them, it's impacting their family, their kids, and generations to come. So that's what inspires me, because I truly believe, and I think men have been put in an odd position themselves,
Mhm.
that men, just like women, are phenomenal creatures, and we have the ability to do so much, and we are extremely powerful, yet we don't utilize that power, and
Mhm.
we don't utilize it in the best way. And if we did, I think this world would be a different place. And that's ultimately why I do what I do, is because when I impact one man, impact his family, it has a ripple effect on their community, has a ripple effect on their nation, and ultimately the world. So it's kind of changing the world, you can say, one man at a time.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that and how this work ties to such a personal connection you have with your family. So, I wanted to visit your book. We'll get there, but how would you describe the complete man, and how does he show up in this world?
Okay, well, the complete man is someone that is fulfilled within himself. So he is the type of man that is completely confident within himself, that he's learning and growing and understanding that being complete is a constant journey in life, right? It's not something that you say, I'm complete and I'm done. It's never that.
Apologize for the glitch there with technology and everything. So as you were saying, we were in the process of discussing about what the complete man looks like. Do you have any last comments about that concept?
Yeah, it's definitely being complete from within and knowing that everything that we want starts from inside first. So if we are feeling incomplete outside, if we feel like we're missing something in our life, whether that's more money, a better relationship, whatever that looks like, we have to look inside first, because that's where it stems. So if we want that, being the complete man is about attracting it versus just wanting to work hard trying to get it. And there's a big difference there, because when you feel complete from within, things just start happening for you, and things just start falling into place, rather than just using sheer will to try to get it. Not that you don't have to use effort, not that you don't have to have a strong will, not that you don't have to put in late nights, for example. It just means that it's not as tough as it typically is. And
Mm,
that is a big difference. And even if you're not achieving what you want to achieve, you still feel good about yourself. That's ultimately what it is. And people will notice the difference.
mm,
People will notice a difference around you. Your wife will notice a difference, or your partner, your spouse, whoever it is. Your kids will notice a difference. Your business partners will notice a difference. When you feel complete from within, everybody else reacts to you differently.
mm. I love that. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that insight. Where can people find you should they choose to connect with you?
Sure, you can connect with me on pretty much any social media channel except for TikTok. I'm not so active on there, but mainly LinkedIn. That's the main platform, at Purdeep Sangha, or even on Instagram at Purdeep Sangha as well. And you could even go to my website and reach out to me. There's a contact form on there. It's purdeepsangha.com. And if you'd like to get a copy of the audiobook, I can give you a promo code, which is Victory75. So it's Victory and the number 75, all one word. If you go to completemanaudio.com, you'll get 75% off.
Awesome. Awesome. And my last question here is, what advice would you give my listeners as it comes to purpose, fulfillment, and meaning?
Oh, hands down, I would say take a look at your emotions and your feelings,
Mm,
because we actually have different, we are, again, creatures of feelings. Everything that we do has an underlying feeling, and there's an underlying purpose to that feeling. We feel hunger, for example, because we need to replenish our calories. We feel love, for example, because we need to connect with other social beings. So we have an underlying feeling. And when you're able to identify those feelings that you have cravings for, or a desire for, or an adversity to, for example, if you're feeling adverse to something like pain or anger or whatever that is, it's important to identify that. And when you can use and understand how to turn things around and make your emotions work for you, then you become infinitely more powerful. So here's the simple tip that I tell people is, first, Start off by identifying the top 3 to 5 emotions that you want to feel on a regular basis. That's where you start. And if you can identify those top 3 to 5 emotions, whether it's happiness or joy or content or peace, whatever it is that you want to feel on a regular basis, then you work backwards and you say, what kind of lifestyle will support these emotions? What kind of relationships will support these emotions? And then you work back from that even more and say, what kind of business or career will support that lifestyle? So you work backwards. When you work backwards, it's a lot easier to design your life, to design your purpose rather than the other way around, because a lot of people just jump into a career or business hoping that it's going to give them the fulfillment when it's not, because it creates a lifestyle that doesn't lead to the emotions that they want to feel. So start with emotions, work backwards to the lifestyle and the relationships, then work backwards again to the type of lifestyle, the type of career or profession or business that will lead to that lifestyle.
That's like knowledge bomb right there. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you're correct that we as human beings are emotional creatures and we make decisions based on emotions, and I really can relate with that. So thank you so much for your time. Folks, if you enjoyed this podcast episode and would love to learn more, I highly encourage you to reach out to Purdeep and connect with them on all those various platforms that he's on, and get to know the guy and have a conversation. Really, in the space of performance, purpose and fulfillment. Purdeep, thank you so much again for being on the show. And to the folks out there, if you like this podcast, please subscribe and hit the like button and share it with your friends and family. Thank you again. Appreciate it.